Hey everyone, and welcome back to Cutting Through. Today we've got a topic that I think a lot of people will want to weigh in on their opinions. And from what I gauged today, is that hadn't actually thought about the idea that cookbooks might be a thing of the past and that people are turning to YouTube. Hey Doc, good to
Hey,
see you.
hey, good to see you, Antoine.
Good. So I was just introducing the topic, and I was saying that a lot of people haven't even considered the fact that YouTube might be replacing cookbooks as the de facto method of instruction. People still have this.
Are you getting death threats from the publishing industry for even bringing up the prospect?
I think by the end of this conversation, we both might.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just start off with saying that, as someone who actually writes recipe and as someone who collects cookbooks, both of us, both Doc and I collect a lot of cookbooks. We spend years kind of, rummaging through bookstores to look out for books. But also as someone who writes recipes and who cooks, I found that language and words are really, really inadequate when trying to communicate how to cook something and how to cook something accurately. And cooking is a very sensory experience. I mean, there's obviously you're moving your hands and you're looking at the dish, but at various points you're also listening to the food. You're smelling the food, and all of these I find really are not adequately communicated through text. And even when you're looking at visually the doneness of food, you can't really communicate the exact degree. And I find that YouTube and videos do that far more effectively. Doc, what do you think about that?
No, I absolutely I agree, and I think YouTube is particularly good at certain aspects that cookbooks have never actually been very good at capturing. I mean, especially for instance, when you're making things like breads, like rotis, uh, there are lots of very small like hand movements, lots of things that really come in the gesture and the manipulation of the dough, which cookbooks find really hard to capture. I mean, sometimes they think the solution is to add photographs, but I actually think photographs are worse because
No.
photographs you get too much information. The one thing
Yeah.
that sort of helps sometimes is to have very simple line drawings, which you can do exactly as you want, but that's an added cost, and most cookbooks don't do that. I mean, I think the only Indian cookbook that's done that in a big way has been Yamuna Devi's Lord Krishna's Table, which is an
Hmm.
extraordinary cookbook as a result. But when you're doing a YouTube video, automatically you can see all these small little gestures about how to manipulate the dough, all these little unspoken things that you would get when you were actually seeing a live demonstration, but it's very hard for a cookbook to convey.
Exactly. And one of the things that people have come back to me and said, well, we like the feel of cookbooks. We like browsing through it. Learning about cultures, learning about descriptions in of recipes. I find that there are fewer books which do that, especially with the new crop of books. And the other thing also is that people talk about is like writing notes in the margins and kind of
Yeah.
getting someone else's. That is almost impossible. I would never touch any one
Yeah,
of the cookbooks
and
that I
it's,
own.
it's something you see in a lot of older cookbooks, and this is
Yeah,
the thing, a lot of older cookbooks were actually very practically focused. They were meant for, unfortunately, they were mostly meant for women. And there was nothing fancy about them. So they were printed on, and they were meant to be cheap also. So they were printed on very basic paper, and nobody had any problems writing down. And they were actually meant to be like that. I mean, B. Wilson has written a wonderful essay in the Wall Street Journal very recently about how old cookbooks talk back to you. And that's
right,
absolutely true. I mean, if we pick up a cookbook, from our grandmother's generation, often we'll find little notes saying, yes, this is a really good recipe, or watch out, this
right.
recipe doesn't work, or sometimes a completely alternate recipe written down by the side. And you can do that in old cookbooks. Now, when you're getting this really expensive new cookbook printed on glossy paper, I mean, it's going to be really hard to write on it. But
Right, right.
online you can. And sometimes in online recipes, some of the most fascinating suggestions actually happen in the comment section.
Comments, exactly.
When people who have actually used and tried the recipe write back with variations, with differences, with hints. So in a sense, what is happening online, because there's no cost to commenting, is that you're creating that dialogue with the cookbook that you used to have earlier.
Right, right. And I think she also makes an interesting point in that article about, how the rigidity of cookbooks and the rigidity of the recipe, these notes actually indicate that, there is a certain flexibility in it, which you
Absolutely.
don't really feel with video. I mean, you feel like, well, okay, this is more participatory and it
Yeah.
is more open to interpretation.
Yeah, and a video can be modified, a new video can be put up, and in that sense, you get a you get a sense that a cookbook online, you have, it's part of a larger conversation between people who. You're
Exactly.
right. I've been going through some of my cookbooks for the purpose of this thing, and this is one cookbook that will be familiar with you. It's the Time and Talents Club Cookbook, okay,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
a great Bombay institution. And the thing about the Time and Talents Club Cookbook was that many people contributed to it. There were many editions. Each edition had more recipes in it. There were improvements, there were suggestions, there were changes. And you really get a sense. I mean, as you just do a quick look, uh, 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 you really get a sense that that was a part of the whole community. And
Yeah.
today I find these online, food sites, YouTube sites are creating that sense of an online community of cooks, which you used to get
Yeah.
in books like the Time and Talents Club Cookbook.
Exactly. There's a certain democratization that has happened. It's kind of
Absolutely.
made it accessible to everybody. There are no gatekeepers to decide whether a book is worth or a recipe is worth publishing or not. So you've got so many
And
more.
this has been one of the biggest issues, because unfortunately with cookbooks, there have been gatekeepers that which who are the publishing industry, who, as I said, are going to have, like, goons out for after at the end of this thing. But honestly, while I think there have been many well-intentioned, really sincere people in the publishing industry trying to produce cookbooks, at the end of the day, the constraints that they operate under, of, I guess, profitability, of what is physically possible, and let's be honest, also the sort of prejudices that
Hmm.
they come to. Sometimes it's real estimation of what the market will buy. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
more reflecting their, let's face it, fairly elite, usually English speaking prejudices. But as a
Right.
result of which, there are a whole range of cookbooks, a whole range of food cultures in India which have not been captured. And online, I mean, it happens. And one of the most fascinating things, I think, for Indian food has been, all these village YouTube channels. All these
Right.
guys,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
small towns and villages who have a camera and just start shooting videos of their grandparents cooking food. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's fascinating because you get a whole idea of a actual real food culture in India, which otherwise never gets captured. Who is going out and capturing village food, food from non-elite communities? For instance, like one of the most basic things, the South Indian food still labors under this huge misconception that South Indian food is vegetarian, predominantly vegetarian. And the reason
Hmm.
it labors under that is because the elites who documented the first South Indian food were mostly Brahmin, Tamil Brahmin
Right.
in
Exactly.
most cases. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not, dissing what they did. They captured their own community. So a book like Samay Tupar, the great, S. Meenakshi Ammal's Tamil Brahmin cookbook, is a fantastic book. It was a
Yeah.
groundbreaking book because it showed that it was possible for women to capture the sort of recipes that they were actually cooking. And if you go back to Samay Tupar, especially the first volume, it's extraordinarily detailed. It's her recipe for sambar goes across something like 10 pages, where she's actually almost breathing over your neck, saying, do this, do that. If you can't do this, so it's an extraordinary cookbook. But the fact is, it is an upper class Brahmin cookbook. And
Yeah.
overwhelmingly, the first cookbooks that came out of South Indian food were upper class Brahmin cookbooks. And this misconception has grown up that South Indian food is vegetarian food. Whereas, of course, we know that's not true. There is a huge South Indian non-vegetarian tradition, which again started being captured to some extent, but only again with the elites, with Chettiars. But
Hmm.
even beyond the chetiyars, there is a whole village tradition of non-veg and egg, and not just not just non-veg, just cooking all the
Yeah.
local greens and plants and things like that, which would never enter an elite kitchen. And
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
guys in villages going out and just taking their camera and shooting their grandparents like cooking has suddenly documented all this and brought this to the world. So to me,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
an example of what you can do without gatekeepers.
Yeah, the other point I mean is language. Because for a lot of us, whether whatever language, whether it's South Indian or any of the international languages, you could not actually follow this. And I have found that a lot of South Indian women again are doing fantastic stuff
Absolutely.
with mobiles, as well as our international people. And because again it's so visual, you can actually follow it
Yeah,
without actually
absolutely.
needing a text or needing to follow the language.
No, absolutely. And you have people showing all the very simple things that normally don't get captured in a cookbook. For instance, I'll give you a basic example that butter, okay, is so essential to a lot of Indian food. But
Hmm.
what most people don't realize is that, and if you read butter in a recipe, you just assume it says you can go out and buy the store-bought butter. But
Yeah.
a lot of Indian households traditionally made their own butter. Not even from cream. Yes, people did collect the top of the cream, but a lot of them made it from dahi.
Hmm.
And they churned dahi. And churning dahi is a bit of a process. You have to add ice cold water. And this is something that normally never gets captured in a cookbook. And it is important because the taste of butter made from dahi is very subtly different. It's
Exactly.
slightly more tangy, it's slightly more acid. But when I went online to try and find it, I found a lady who was showing you the whole process of how to make
Yeah.
butter from dahi, including the crucial fact that if you put it in a mixie, you need to put a little bit of ice in it because the ice is what causes the thing to come out. And it's these sort of things which ordinarily would never get captured in a cookbook, or cookbooks wouldn't even bother, or it would be just too complicated. But online, you can do it all.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're not actually restricted by geography in any sense, And
Yeah.
one of the things whenever I come up with a recipe, I'm always looking. My recipes are always cross cultural, and they take ideas from different places. And the gamut of recipes, the things that I have discovered, simply on YouTube existed. I didn't even know dishes or these cuisines existed.
Absolutely. I mean, especially niche ingredients,
Yeah.
I mean, just some time back, for instance, our common friend Rushina gave me these amazing buddies, which are from her husband's community in Garhwal. And
Hmm.
they're made from the stems of taro roots, which in winter are covered with this urad dal paste, and then they're dried. And it's a very tricky operation, but the result is something quite amazing because it tastes like mushrooms. Okay, I've never met a vadi that tastes like mushrooms. Now, this is a really obscure dish and obscure like sort of ingredient. Even there are a few cookbooks of Pahadi things, but they won't include it because the cookbook
Yeah.
editor will say, where is somebody in Bombay going to be able to get this ingredient? So what's the point of putting it in a cookbook? Okay,
Yeah.
but I actually went online and I found a recipe of a Mahila Mandal in Garhwal, actually showing how to do it. And that is really important documentation. I'm not saying I'm going to go out and do it myself, but I
Sure.
think it's really important that there is a Mahila Mandal somewhere in Garhwal who's capturing online how to make these very intricate, complicated like wadis. And
Hmm.
at least it makes people aware that this is something that, and the next step is then to try and find a way to buy it from these sort of Mahila Mandals. And there are a whole
Yeah.
range of really niche ingredients like this, which just don't get into cookbooks because the cookbook editor will say, who's going to be able to buy that in Delhi? Who's going to be able to buy that in Bombay? What's the point of including it in a cookbook? Yet it
Right.
has
Right.
to be documented.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The other problem is actually with the actual recipe itself. I have a problem with that in terms of how people write recipes, and how carelessly actually people write recipes.
Yeah.
I've been the editor of a cookbook, and I've got recipes from professional chefs, which would actually drive the hotels
Okay,
mad because I
this
was
this is where I'm really going to start ranting because to me, professional chefs are some of the worst writers of recipes. Okay, and
absolutely,
this
absolutely.
and this is because this is no disrespect to chefs because I think chefs are amazing. I would never want to go back to those decades when chefs were in the kitchen and nobody ever heard it. To me, one of the most amazing things the last 20 years has been the emergence of chefs and them coming out and being like, spokespeople for cooking. But that still doesn't mean that they can write a good home recipe. Okay, there
Yeah.
is a level of skill that comes in cooking in a professional kitchen, a level of utensils, of ingredients. The kitchen, the knives that you use are so different. So the way that you cook you just cut in a professional kitchen is different from the way you cut at home. And
Yeah.
so to me, I mean, professional chefs writing recipes is really difficult. I mean, they can do it, but they really have to reinvent themselves completely for the home kitchen.
Oh yeah, yeah, completely.
Having said that, there is a value in professional chefs documenting it for other professional chefs, obviously. So yes, I
Yeah.
think there's a value in them documenting food, but let's not pretend that's ever meant to be made for home kitchens.
Yeah, no, but that was actually one of my big problems is that, chefs are so used to communicating with each other on a professional level that all their recipes would be shorthand.
Yeah.
I mean, they would just give broad instructions, which a chef, and even I understood, and I understood what they were trying to say. But for someone who's at home and who doesn't understand the whole technique to kind of get to where they have referred to, it was completely obscure. And a lot of hotels would really get really pissed off with me because I would send back recipes, with lots of corrections. And again, this is something when you watch chefs online, you
Yeah.
immediately get a sense of, are you competent enough to cook that or not?
Yeah. No, I just said, for me, what I look for are the knives. Okay. You will never
Yeah.
see a chef without his really fancy, Swiss or Japanese knife made with this high tensile steel, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and
Well,
fantastic.
frying pans too.
But the
Frying pans
fact
too.
is, Indian home cooks don't use such knives. We
Yeah.
use really simple knives, or half the time in most kitchens, our knives are made out of repurposed leaf springs, because it's high quality steel and just given an edge. And this whole mystique and fetishization of knives, which you get in the Western world, is completely alien to Indian kitchens. We use very basic knives, most Indian kitchens, which are just good for peeling and chopping and very fine chopping. And that is never reflected in professional kitchens.
Right, right, right. The other thing is, do you get a sense that now cookbooks might only end up being vanity projects, that, it's only something that, say, restaurant chefs or
Yeah.
celebrity television chefs will kind of come out to, that there is no
I
real
mean,
utility for the...
that's happened, but with one caveat. I mean, it's true. I mean, nearly uh, most cookbooks that have come out of large publishing houses have actually been vanity projects. Either vanity projects for people who want to document their home cooking in some sort of nostalgic tribute to their mothers, which is fine. I mean, and this is useful. Or it's like all young chefs are told that if you want to become a TV chef, if you want to become a brand, you have to produce a cookbook. It's all become part of a brand building exercise. And
Right.
to me, nothing exemplifies this more than the whole trajectory of Vikas Khanna, who is a very good chef, a brilliant chef. He's done wonders for Indian food internationally. But he's also become a cookbook production factory. And it's ridiculous. And this is what happens when you start using cookbooks to build a brand. There's no end to it. So you have to keep producing cookbook after cookbook after cookbook, whether there is any real value being added to it. And I feel it's sad because very early on in his career, he did produce at least a few really remarkable cookbooks. There's one book he did many years back called, I think it's called Return to the Valleys, which is about the
Okay.
food of the Himalayan valleys. And that is a truly remarkable cookbook which really documents a very little documented geographical cuisine. But now he's producing books of his poetry, of his random stuff, just random sort of cookbooks. And worst of all, he goes around bragging about that what he says is the world's most expensive cookbook. It is something called Utsav, and it is incredibly expensive. It's incredible amount of work has gone to it, and it's so rare that it's never sold in a bookshop. But you have to actually, you have to be a celebrity, and he'll give you a copy. And to me, that is like mental. I mean, how does anybody take pride in producing a cookbook that nobody is ever going to use? Cookbooks initially were meant to be practical tools that people would
Yeah.
actually use to cook. And okay, I don't think that's the only function. Yes, they have a function in documenting a cuisine, a culture. That's all that is important. But the thing is, they have to be used, they have to be accessible. And if you're doing a cookbook which is so expensive and exclusive that nobody's ever going to access it, what is the point?
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with you. As in, and a lot of these books, and I think Otto Lengi has kind of managed to kind of do that crossover
Yeah.
where, his books reflect his philosophy and reflect what the restaurant does, but they're still very utilitarian. And I think there
Yeah,
are
and
very,
it's true.
very,
And someone like Ottolenghi, because I think because he comes from a real, there is a viewpoint. I mean, there is a viewpoint that talks about the value of ingredients, increasingly the importance of vegetarian ingredients, of doing food that can be done with style at home. And honestly, we were talking earlier about the last time we bought a cookbook that we actually cooked
yeah,
from. And for me, the last
yeah,
time I cooked, I bought a cookbook which I actually made more than 2 or 3 recipes from was probably Ottolenghi's Jerusalem, which is one of the great cookbooks of the last decade. But
yeah, yeah.
after that, I mean, I have bought a few cookbooks, but honestly, I haven't cooked from them.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, the cookbooks that I have really liked and the ones that I sometimes go back to are really the books which either came out of post-war Britain, so the Delia Smith and the early Madhur Jaffrey and all of those, or some of the earlier ones, not Balbir Singh, the ones later after that, the when publishing just came, because those were really clear, those were really simple and utilitarian. And that's
Yeah,
something I find again online.
Madhur's books have been pathbreaking, and partly because Madhur she was selling Indian food to a larger audience, but actually to Indians too. I mean, for a lot of
Too.
Indians
Yeah,
who hadn't actually cooked for themselves. I mean, Madhur's books were really path-breaking, really important. And, a lot of that comes from her extraordinary skill in recording and writing recipes. And, this
yeah,
is something I've seen myself. I mean, some years back, Madhur was in Bombay and she wanted to go to a restaurant. So I took her to Highway Gomantak. Okay. And she was fascinated because she never had that sort of Gomantak food before. And the one thing she was most fascinated with was what the rice bakris. Okay, because she was like, "Oh my God, this is made from rice flour. How do they do it?" She was really fascinated. And one advantage of going to Highway Gomatak is, of course, the owners live right behind. So I
right.
I took Madhur to see Mr. and Mrs. Portmace, the owners, and they were very happy to meet her, especially once the daughter-in-law recognized who she was. And they were happy to share the recipe. And so she kept saying, "How do you make the recipe for the rice bakri?" And she kept probing and she kept probing. And she was, "You're not telling me something, you're not telling me something." And it's not like they were trying to conceal anything. They were like, what do you want to know? She said, "There's something missing." And then finally, the lady said, before we put the bakri on the tawa, you have to throw a little bit of water because that creates the steam that prevents the bakri from sticking to the non-oil tawa. And that is actually the key, a key step, because it prevented the bakri from sticking, but also it gave it that slightly blistered texture to the taste. And what I found amazing was that Madhur knew that a step like that was missing, and she knew how to probe for it and record it, and it would come out in her recipe. That is a real skill which a lot of people don't have.
Don't have. And that is something that would immediately be captured on video, whether the person informed
Exactly.
you of it or not, because some
Yeah,
of
you
these
would
things
see
just get
somebody throwing the
overlooked.
water on the tawa.
Yeah, yeah,
But having
exactly.
said that, Antoine, I want to make one caveat. I think that while I think that most cookbooks in the last decade have been pointless, most Indian cookbooks have been pointless, there has been one category of cookbooks which I think have been really important. And it's very
Okay.
tellingly, it's been the self-published cookbooks.
Yeah,
Because in the last decade, what has happened is it's really interesting because the cost of publishing has come down to the point where anybody can actually publish themselves if they want to put in
yeah,
enough money. And there are all these, you can laugh at them and say vanity publishing houses, but essentially it's a way to get your book into print, whether for whatever reason you have. And a
sure.
lot of really fascinating cookbooks that I've seen in the last few decades, in the last decade, have come from these sort of things. And these are books typically that document the food of one particular community. So, for instance,
Right.
there is there is this one. Can you see it? I'm holding it upside
Yeah.
down. Dadimano Varso, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is an extraordinary book. It's the book of the Palanpuri Jain community, and it was a real community effort. All these group of ladies in Bombay got together and set out to document the book. It's half in Gujarati, half in English, and it is
Yeah.
truly an extraordinary documentation of a community's food, right from the ingredients to the utensils to the different ways the recipes are cooked. It's not just the recipes. Now the thing about this book was that it was self-published, and even today, if you want to buy it, you actually have to go to a jeweler's shop. It's the only book I know for which you can't buy online. You have to go to a jeweler's shop because the Palanpuris are a diamond merchants community, and there's one lady who ran or still used to run a jewelry shop at the one in Eros Cinema, and she very kindly stocked it. So you had to call her and say, "Niyati bhai, can you get me a copy of this book?" And she had to. So it's the only book you have to go to a jeweler's shop to buy. But that's an example to me of what has happened with self-publishing. Another example, another big failing among cookbooks is that large communities have just not been covered. So there's been until recently a complete lack of documentation of Muslim recipes. A few communities, have been a few Muslim communities. Again, everybody assumes there's one thing like Muslim food, but it's not true.
No,
there
no,
are
yeah.
so many Muslim.
There are n number of communities, yeah.
And all their food is different.
It's unique,
as anyone else. And only a few of them have been captured, Khojas to some extent, and because they were in Bombay, and then there was that collection of recipes that Inkilab magazine had, newspaper had published. But, those were just like tiny little pamphlets, really. But for the first time, I mean, let me see if I can find this one. Okay. It's a recipe of the Raudar community, a Tamil Muslim community, not even the only Tamil Muslim, just one Tamil Muslim community. And this lady Hasina Sayed has done it, and it's, as you can see, it's a pretty massive book. And it's a labor of love, and she self-published it. So my qualification will be that yes, I think most cookbooks in the last decade, most in India, have been pointless. But in a few cases, either when they've been self-published, or you have a cookbook author who has enough determination to tell the publishers, no, it has to be done this way. And one good example is Sai Kuran Khandekar's Crumbs, which is a fascinating book on Indian breads. And that is one of the first, there have been several books on Indian breads, and they've all been mostly pointless. But Sai's was the first one that really did great documentation, and that's only because she was able to stand up to the publisher and say, no, it has to be done the way I want it done. And that happened. But
but Doc, having said all of that, looking at the Palanpuri book, the Tamil Muslim book, Sai's book, today, would you actually pick up these books for the recipe, or would you go online and look for a recipe? Would you look at it at YouTube?
That's a good question. I mean, as I said, there are these examples of Dadimano Varso, the Raudar book, to show that there is still value in a cookbook that is comprehensive, that captures the food of a community, and there is a value in an actual cookbook. I mean, while we've been praising the world of online recipes, let's also admit that there are lots of problems with it. I mean, at least with cookbooks, theoretically at least, there's a certain level of quality checking that can happen.
That's very, very theoretical.
Online, I've seen completely crazy recipes online. So just any random thing. So let's not say that online is wonderful. I mean, the only thing is online is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the good and an opportunity for bad. And the best thing is that because it's democratic, the good recipes will get seen more. The bad recipes will disappear. But online is not. It's not that everything online is good, right?
Absolutely.
So, and again, online is very scattered. I mean, yes, there are people creating great websites which document the food of a community, and that's important. But yes, there is some value in a physical book. So, I would say there is value in people from different communities doing really comprehensive collections of their community cookbooks, like Dadimano Varso, like the Rauthar book. And what to me is fascinating is, in a sense, this is going back to where cookbooks started. Because in India, because the original cookbooks in India were exactly this. They were attempts by a community to capture the food of their communities, because it was felt that times were changing, and the community was disappearing. And I have here one example. It's a really old cookbook that Nilufer gave me. This is the original. As you can see, really dark. This is the, you can see it's really a
Wow.
mess.
Yeah.
This is the original Vivid Vani. It's in Gujarati, and it is the great Parsi Gujarati cookbook. And this was one of the first cookbooks printed in India, and it is an attempt to document the food of a particular community. Now, they were doing it because it was felt that the community was changing, that urban life was changing, the structure of the community recipes were being forgotten, so it was important to collect it. And today, it's similar because people feel it's doing it from nostalgia, because as in for instance, the Dadima Warso, the ladies who did it told me that because the Palanpuris are a diamond community, they're scattered across the world, and the
Right.
community units are fading, so they want to. So in a way, in a sense, these community cookbooks are going back to where cookbooks in India started. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
really important, and I really hope more people do these sort of books.
Yeah, one of the things that has always struck me about cookbooks is that it's actually a very technological product, and it was a product, a very technological and historical product. It was didn't just come out of nowhere. It came because of certain fissures in the social situation, where precisely, I mean, whether, and I think earlier it was in a sense because the joint family was breaking up and people were having their own families. They weren't actually being trained by their mothers and grandmothers, and there was a need to communicate this, and text became the cheapest way to do it.
No, absolutely, and that's the origin of, say, Samay Tupa, the Tamil Brahmin cookbook we were talking about. That has a very
Yeah,
precise
but doc,
origin.
for everyone, even the Mangalorean cookbooks, the Goan cookbooks, and
Mangalorean
there's an
cookbooks,
equivalent.
exactly, and
All, yeah,
it's not an accident that they start to be created in the 1940s and the 1950s, because that's
yeah,
the point at which a lot of young men from Mangalore, from Tamil Nadu, started getting jobs as clerks, as officer assistants in offices across India, and they start moving with their companies, with the bureaucracy, to different parts of India, and they take their wives with them. And for the first time, these wives are growing up are setting up their kitchens in Delhi and Calcutta, in places where they don't have the community support that they did earlier. And as Meenakshi Ammal's family, when I met them in Chennai, told me exactly this: that
yeah.
the book started because she had many nieces, and who were being shifted with their husbands to different parts of India. They would write to her, and she would write back recipes on postcards. And after a point, she said, "This is just too much work. Let me just collect all this knowledge that I'm writing on postcards into a book format." And you're right. So that reflected a very precise change as communities started moving outside the geographical area, and the need to document the cookbook started.
Right, right. The other part of it also is that these cookbooks were largely for women, which is a point that you brought up earlier, which is
Yeah.
also very different, I find, with YouTube and online sites. That now you can't actually say, well, okay, you've got your cookbook, now you cook for the family. Anyone can say, well, here's an
Absolutely.
instructional video. You're a man, you're whatever it is, you can go learn yourself.
No,
And that's
absolutely.
a,
It's
yeah,
it's for everybody. It's for students abroad. It's for like I mean, just last week, for instance, in the New York Times, Samin Nasrat,
yeah.
that
Acid
wonderful
feed,
new
yeah.
salt fat cookbook.
Salt.
Her recipe in the New York Times was for sabudana khichdi.
Sabar khichdi, yeah.
Okay, and she admits openly upfront that she had never heard of sabudana khichdi before. She just had a friend who was Maharashtrian who said this was the thing, and she was like, "Oh my God, I've never had a savory tapioca dish before. This sounds so absolutely cool." And she calls his mother, who again he lives in the US, and she gives her recipe for sabudana khichdi. And you know what's fascinating about it? It's actually made in a microwave. The recipe that she gives, and she said that I actually tried making the sabudana khichdi on the stove pot, and it always clumped up too much. Finally, I asked the lady, and she said, "Oh, but I make it in the microwave." And she gives the recipe for how to make her perfect sabudana khichdi in a microwave. Now, this is a huge, change from where sabudana khichdi originates in India. But hey,
Yeah.
it's a way of sabudana khichdi is going out to the world, which I think is fantastic because I love sabudana
Yeah.
khichdi.
Yeah, well, I don't, and but anyway, let's not get into
Why don't you
that.
like
But yeah,
sabudana khichdi?
I like sabudana. I don't like khichdi.
Okay.
But I mean, see, things like this also. I mean, this would be it's a complete side topic. Would get attacked for being inauthentic and non-traditional, all that. But anyway, that's rubbish.
But this is the problem. This is where gatekeepers come in. My sister, for instance, hates brinjals, and if she ever wrote a cookbook, she would never include any recipe about brinjals ever. So this is the problem with gatekeepers. At least
Exactly.
online, even brinjal haters and brinjal lovers can all have their cookbooks, all of the recipes.
Yeah. The other category of people who I find generally unrepresented in physical cookbooks are people with specific illnesses. And those whether it's MSG or whatever dietary or whatever this thing, YouTube and I found that having videos, they're far more widespread. They kind of reach out to a lot of these hidden communities, communities which again completely unserviced by the print industry.
Right. I mean, that actually is sort of happening to some extent. Because as part of the wellness industry, and because of the wellness industry, I'm starting to find a few cookbooks that you're getting all your keto cookbooks, gluten-free cookbooks.
But again, Doc, those are just the big dietary trends, but not people who have specific illnesses.
So for instance, like one cookbook which I have somewhere, I don't have it, I can't find it at the moment, was for people with celiac disease, which is where you really can't digest gluten, rather than all these people who imagine they can't digest gluten, but that's another matter. And this book on celiac disease, which was really a useful cookbook, and I just picked it up in a shop in Bombay. Not even it was a lifestyle store or something. And it had actually really useful recipes using traditional Indian ingredients like, nachni, not nachni, the water chestnut flour and things like that, which people with celiac disease can consume. Sorry, apparently I can't be heard.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I can hear you clearly. Okay.
Great. Okay. So I think my thumb was covering the microphone at one point. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. No, well, we've got someone complaining about the sabudana khichdi cooking sabudana microwave, but well, we've crossed that bridge already.
As I said, these are all different ways. I mean, there is no hard and fast rule. If people can cook a sabudana khichdi that is good, that satisfies them in a microwave, well, good for them. I mean, just try it. I mean, nobody's saying you have to cook it in a microwave. Anyway.
Exactly, yeah. Well, Doc, thank you so much for joining me this evening. This conversation has been exactly as irrelevant as I thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I get a feeling that editors and chefs are going to come after us, like
quite possibly.
Anytime soon.
Well, you are safely ensconced in Goa, so you're safe for the time being at least. I'm in Bombay. But thanks so much. That was really, really fun. And I think, we've got to establish that there is still a little bit of space left for cookbooks, particularly for community cookbooks, and also for people who self-publish and who get their work edited well. I think that's really key. But sorry.
No, go on. No,
yeah. So thanks so much, Doc, and thank you everyone for joining in. I will see you next week at Monday. So have a great weekend and stay safe, stay well.